Life has a way of taking us down unexpected paths, doesn't it? Sometimes, those paths are filled with pain, regret, and loss. But other times, they lead us to places of healing, self-discovery, and new beginnings. Welcome to the story of Ethan Parker, a man who lost everything, only to find a new sense of purpose in the most unlikely of places. It's a journey about forgiveness, resilience, and the courage to start over. In this tale, Ethan will face the ghosts of his past, challenge the limits he once set for himself, and ultimately discover that true peace isn't found by escaping the world, it's found in embracing it, one step at a time. Join me as we dive into a story of love, loss, and the beautiful, messy process of learning to live again. Are you ready to walk with Ethan? His story is just beginning. Ethan Moore was an ordinary man, living a simple life as a courier for a tech company. Every day, he went to work and returned home to his wife, Lily, in a quiet suburban neighborhood. They had been married for nearly 7 years, but over time, their relationship had begun to fade. While nothing seemed outwardly wrong, Ethan could feel a shift in Lily's behavior. She started paying more attention to her appearance, having long phone calls that she kept secret, and spending more time away from home. The nights she came home late had become more frequent, and Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. One evening, while Lily was out meeting an old friend, Ethan decided to stay home and try to focus on work. But the nagging feeling in the back of his mind wouldn't go away. He wondered if these little changes were signs of something bigger. Then, a sudden thought struck him: is she cheating on me? Unable to ignore the growing unease, Ethan decided to take action. He secretly installed a GPS tracking device in Lily's car, one that she would never notice. Over the next few days, he tracked her every move. One day, he saw Lily driving to a small hotel called the Riverside Inn. His heart skipped a beat, but he refused to believe what he was seeing. Ethan decided to follow her more closely. He checked the GPS route and, taking a day off work, tracked her to the hotel once again. This time, he didn't just watch from a distance, he went inside to confirm what was happening. When he saw Lily leaving the hotel with a man he didn't recognize, his heart shattered. The man was Derek Miller, a colleague of Lily's from her office. Ethan didn't need any more proof. He knew the truth now. Devastated by the betrayal, Ethan was consumed with rage. He knew he had to do something to get back at both Lily and Derek. He began gathering evidence, hotel receipts, secretive emails, and even video footage from the hotel's surveillance cameras. He didn't stop there. Ethan created a massive poster with images of Lily and Derek, along with all the incriminating details of their affair. He made sure to plaster it all over their neighborhood and posted it online for everyone to see. Their lives were now the topic of conversation, and the community turned against them. Ethan also began sabotaging their shared assets. He transferred money from their joint account to one he controlled, and filed for divorce without giving Lily a chance to explain herself. He felt a sense of power as his plan unfolded, believing he was making them pay for what they'd done. The consequences were swift and harsh. Lily lost her job immediately when her affair became public knowledge. Her company couldn't tolerate her actions, and she was shunned by her family and friends. She was now isolated, with nowhere to turn. Derek, the man she'd betrayed Ethan with, didn't fare any better. He was fired from his job, and his wife filed for divorce the moment she learned of the affair. His life fell apart, and he was left to face the consequences alone. Ethan, from the sidelines, watched as their lives crumbled, but he didn't feel the satisfaction he thought he would. A deep emptiness gnawed at him. In some way, he realized that he wasn't the true victor in this story. His actions, though they'd caused their downfall, hadn't healed him. He still felt hollow. Months passed, and Ethan began to heal in his own way. He found solace in writing, channeling his pain into a novel about his experiences. The book, titled The Broken Path, became a bestseller. Ethan's life changed as he became a well-known author, gaining fame and recognition. However, despite his newfound success, he still felt something was missing. Fame and money didn't fix the pain inside him. In his quest for meaning, Ethan adopted a rescue dog named Max. With Max by his side, Ethan found comfort in the simple things: long walks in the park, quiet mornings, and the unconditional love of his dog. Slowly, he began to rebuild his life, finding peace in the present and learning to let go of the past. One afternoon, several years later, Ethan unexpectedly ran into Lily at a local coffee shop. She had changed. No longer the confident, beautiful woman he once knew, she looked tired, worn out, and regretful. She tried to apologize, seeking forgiveness, asking if there was a chance for reconciliation. But Ethan had moved on. "I'm not the same person I was, Lily," he said softly. "Everything is over." He paused, looking at her with a sense of finality. "I don't need your forgiveness. I've learned to live with the past without letting it control me." Without another word, Ethan stood up, leaving the coffee shop. He didn't need closure. He didn't need to fix the broken pieces of his past. He simply chose to walk away and move forward. With Max by his side, Ethan began a new chapter in his life. The past was behind him, and the future was still unwritten. As the weeks went by, Ethan's life seemed to take on a new rhythm. He woke up each morning, greeted by Max's wagging tail, and went for long walks before settling into his writing routine. His days were quieter, less chaotic than before, but there was something about the simplicity of it all that felt fulfilling. It was a far cry from the intense emotions and turmoil he'd experienced in the past. He found himself more focused on what lay ahead rather than what had already been lost. Max had become more than just a pet, he was Ethan's companion, his source of comfort during the long nights when the silence seemed too much to bear. The dog's loyalty was a reminder to Ethan of the kind of love he had once yearned for but never received. One day, while sitting in his favorite cafe working on a new project, Ethan received an email that would change the course of his journey. It was from a literary agent he'd met briefly at a book signing event months ago. The agent had read The Broken Path and was interested in signing him for a new book deal. Ethan's heart raced as he read through the email. He had no idea how much his life could change with just a few words. But it wasn't just the book deal that excited him. It was the sense that he was being given a chance at something more, something beyond the past he'd worked so hard to bury. This was an opportunity to create something new, something that would push him beyond the limits of his previous experiences. Despite the fresh opportunities before him, the past still had a way of creeping into Ethan's thoughts. There were times, especially late at night, when the memories of Lily and their life together returned unbidden. The image of her tear-streaked face, begging for forgiveness, would appear in his mind's eye. But with time, those memories began to lose their sharp edges, becoming more like distant echoes of a life he no longer recognized as his own. Ethan knew that he couldn't escape the past entirely, it had shaped him, after all. But he had learned something important over the past year: healing doesn't mean forgetting. It meant accepting what had happened and allowing it to be a part of his story without letting it define who he was becoming. He was no longer the man consumed by rage and revenge. He had transcended that version of himself. One afternoon, as Ethan sat in his apartment looking out at the city skyline, he realized that he had been waiting for something his whole life: closure. But closure was an illusion. It didn't come with an apology, a final conversation, or some grand gesture of reconciliation. It came when he stopped seeking it from others and started giving it to himself. He didn't need answers from Lily or Derek. He didn't need to relive the pain anymore. The closure Ethan had longed for wasn't external, it was within him all along. With the book deal signed and the manuscript underway, Ethan began to look at life through a different lens. He was no longer just a man with a painful past, he was a storyteller, a creator of new worlds, new possibilities. The future was no longer something he feared. It was something to embrace. Max, ever faithful, became a symbol of Ethan's newfound perspective on life. Each walk, each new day, was a reminder that there was still so much left to discover. And as the months passed, Ethan's first novel was finally published. The Broken Path reached an even wider audience than he had expected, and readers responded to his raw, unflinching honesty. They connected with his pain, his transformation, and his journey toward healing. It was no longer just Ethan's story, it was the story of many people who had experienced loss, betrayal, and the struggle to rebuild their lives. As the book tour began, Ethan found himself traveling across the country, meeting readers, and giving talks. It was surreal. There was a part of him that still couldn't quite believe that he was standing on these stages, speaking to people who had found comfort in his words. But for the first time in years, he felt a sense of pride in what he had created. On one of these trips, Ethan visited a small bookstore in a town he had never been to before. He was signing books when a familiar face approached the table. It was Derek Miller, the man who had once been the source of so much pain. Derek stood in front of him, looking older, wearier, and without the arrogance that had once marked his behavior. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, quietly. Ethan looked up, his heart racing slightly. The anger that once burned in his chest was gone, replaced by a strange sense of calm. After a long moment, Derek finally spoke. "I've read your book," he said softly. "I don't know what I expected, but it was more than I deserved. I know I don't have a right to ask, but I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I've made so many mistakes, and I've hurt so many people, including you." Ethan paused, studying Derek's face. He could see the remorse, but there was no need for Ethan to rush into forgiveness. Instead, he smiled, not out of malice, but out of a sense of understanding. "It's okay," Ethan replied simply. "You're not the one who needs forgiveness anymore. It's me who needed to forgive myself. I'm glad you're finding your way, but I've moved on. I hope you do, too." With that, Derek nodded and walked away, leaving Ethan standing there, no longer burdened by the past. As Ethan's book continued to do well, and his second book began to take shape, he realized that the journey of healing never truly ended. Each day was a new step forward, and with Max by his side, Ethan found joy in the quiet moments that had once seemed so foreign to him. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in his life, Ethan felt ready to walk it. He wasn't seeking revenge, nor was he waiting for closure. He had already found something more important, peace. It wasn't something that came with external validation or even with the forgiveness of others. It was something he gave to himself. And with each passing day, he learned to live more fully in the present, leaving the past where it belonged, behind him. As Ethan settled into this new phase of life, something unexpected began to happen. It wasn't just the book tours or the growing readership that brought him new experiences, it was the people he met along the way. He had spent so many years consumed by the past that he had forgotten how to form meaningful relationships with those around him. But now, as his life began to stabilize, he realized that there was a world outside of the pain and anger he'd once held so close. It was time to embrace the possibility of new connections. During one of his book signings, he met Sophie, a fellow author who had written a series of psychological thrillers. Sophie had a calm presence about her, someone who, like Ethan, had her own past struggles but had channeled them into her writing. They hit it off instantly, sharing stories over coffee and exchanging ideas about the craft of writing. Sophie had a certain wisdom about her, a quiet strength that Ethan admired. She had been through her own version of heartache but had found a way to use it to fuel her creativity, much like Ethan had. Their conversations often stretched late into the evening, and over time, a deeper connection began to form. Sophie wasn't like Lily, nor was she anything like the people from his past. She wasn't looking for answers or apologies, she was simply present in the moment. Their friendship grew into something more, gentle, unhurried, and without the baggage that had weighed down his previous relationships. With Sophie, Ethan learned to appreciate the beauty of a connection built from mutual understanding rather than the expectation of perfection. Still, Ethan was cautious. He had been burned before, and the scars on his heart were not easily erased. But Sophie didn't push him. She allowed him the space he needed to heal, and in return, he gave her the honesty and vulnerability that had taken years for him to reclaim. As time passed, Ethan's life became a careful balance of his writing career, his growing relationship with Sophie, and his deepening connection with Max. He continued to write, pouring his heart into each page. His second book was coming along slowly but steadily, a reflection of how he was now living his life, one step at a time, without rushing through it. He was no longer seeking quick fixes or easy answers. He was learning to sit with the discomfort and trust that, in time, the story would unfold. But as his world began to settle, Ethan couldn't shake a growing feeling, a sense that something still needed to change. While he had healed in many ways, he realized that he had spent so much time recovering from his past that he hadn't yet fully embraced his future. He had spent years consumed by his bitterness toward Lily and Derek, but now that they were no longer in his life, he had the freedom to focus on his own path. He needed to face the reality that the person he had once been, the man driven by revenge, consumed by anger, was still a part of him. He had learned to forgive others, but he had never fully forgiven himself. Ethan understood now that he couldn't move forward without letting go of the last remnants of self-loathing that still held him back. One evening, as he sat by the window in his apartment, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, he made a decision. It was time for a change, time to stop hiding from the future and finally step into it. He wasn't going to let fear, doubt, or even his past define the man he would become. The first step toward this new future was risky. Ethan had always played it safe, never fully allowing himself to take chances with his heart or with his life. But with Sophie by his side and Max to ground him, Ethan decided to do something he had never dared to do before. He moved. It wasn't just a physical move, it was an emotional one. He decided to leave the city that had held so many memories of his pain and start fresh in a new town. He had long been drawn to the coastal town of Cedar Bay, a quiet place by the sea, known for its artists and writers who had escaped the hustle of city life. It felt like the right place for him, a place where he could truly let go of the past and embrace his new future. Sophie, although sad to see him go, was supportive. They agreed to continue their relationship long distance, but Sophie was understanding. She, too, had her own journey to navigate, and though they were both unsure of what the future held, they knew they would continue to support one another, no matter the distance. Ethan packed up his apartment, taking only the essentials, his books, his writing equipment, and, of course, Max. As he drove away from the city, he felt a sense of relief wash over him. The air felt fresher, the road ahead clearer. He wasn't running away from anything, he was running toward everything that was yet to come. Cedar Bay was everything Ethan had imagined it would be. It was peaceful, serene, and filled with the kind of beauty that made him feel alive again. The town was small, but it had a tight-knit community of people who appreciated art, nature, and simple living. Ethan felt he had found a place that truly matched who he was becoming. He found a small cottage near the edge of the town, overlooking the sea. It was cozy and full of character, with large windows that let in the soft, golden light of the sunset. It was the perfect space for him to write, reflect, and continue his journey of self-discovery. Max quickly adapted to their new surroundings, running through the fields and jumping into the waves whenever they went for walks along the beach. Ethan, too, found himself becoming more in tune with the rhythms of nature. The sound of the waves crashing against the shore became his background music as he worked on his new novel. The peacefulness of the area helped him feel more connected to his work, and for the first time in years, he felt truly at home. Months passed, and life in Cedar Bay became exactly what Ethan had needed. He spent his days writing, exploring the town, and meeting new people. He even started volunteering at a local bookstore, something he never would have considered doing back in the city. He found joy in simple things, in connecting with others who shared his passion for books and storytelling. One afternoon, as he sat in the bookstore, Sophie called him. There was excitement in her voice, something he hadn't heard in a while. "I've made a decision," she said. "I'm moving to Cedar Bay. I want to be there with you." Ethan's heart swelled with a mix of surprise and happiness. He hadn't expected her to make such a bold move, but he was touched by her commitment. It was another step in their journey, a step toward building a future together, without the weight of their pasts holding them back. And so, the road ahead was wide open, filled with endless possibilities. Ethan had come a long way from the man who was once consumed by pain and vengeance. He had found peace, love, and purpose. And, for the first time in his life, he was ready to embrace whatever came next. When Sophie arrived in Cedar Bay, everything seemed to fall into place. Her decision to join Ethan wasn't just about the convenience of being in the same town, it was a testament to how much they had both grown. They had spent months apart, living their individual lives, but their connection had only deepened. Sophie's move wasn't a rush, it was a natural progression, a way to continue their journey together, but this time, without the ghosts of their pasts weighing them down. Ethan greeted her at the small, cozy cafe by the beach on her first day in Cedar Bay. The place was a local favorite, with large windows that overlooked the water, and the air smelled of fresh coffee and salt water. Sophie looked out of place in her city attire, but Ethan could already see the comfort she was finding in the town's simplicity. As they sat down at a corner table, their eyes met, and something passed between them, a silent understanding that they were finally in the right place. "I can't believe I'm actually here," Sophie said, her eyes scanning the picturesque surroundings. "It feels like a dream." Ethan smiled, grateful that they had both chosen to take this leap together. "You made the right choice. We both did." Over the next few weeks, Sophie settled into Cedar Bay with the same ease she had when they first met, finding her place in the quiet rhythm of the town. She found a small, local bookstore where she began working part-time. It was a charming space, filled with stories and history. She felt at home there, among the pages of books and the cozy atmosphere. As for Ethan, his days were spent working on his new novel, exploring the town's hidden nooks, and nurturing his relationship with Sophie. They would often spend evenings by the sea, sitting in comfortable silence or sharing their dreams for the future. Max, of course, was thriving in this new environment, bounding joyfully through the fields, as if the change had revitalized him as much as it had Ethan. The trio became inseparable, a little family built on trust, healing, and love. But even in this peaceful existence, Ethan knew that the true challenge was still ahead. The question that lingered in his mind, the one he had been avoiding for so long, was about his writing. He had found success with The Broken Path, but now he wondered if he had more to say. Was he ready to step out of the shadows of his past, to write something that wasn't just based on his own pain and struggles, but something that could reach even more people? The next book felt like a new chapter not just for him as a writer, but for him as a person. Despite his peace, Ethan found himself in a creative rut. The book he had been working on for months just wasn't coming together. His mind, which had once been full of inspiration, was now plagued with doubt. Was he running out of stories to tell? Was his success with The Broken Path just a fluke? There were days when the words wouldn't come, and Ethan found himself staring at his laptop screen for hours, the cursor blinking mockingly at him. He had the freedom now, the space to create, the time to explore, but the pressure to produce something meaningful weighed on him. Sophie noticed his frustration. One evening, after they had shared a quiet dinner, she sat beside him on the couch as he brooded over his work. "You're putting too much pressure on yourself," Sophie said gently, her voice calm but firm. "You've already created something incredible. Why does it have to be a constant race for more?" Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's not about the race, Sophie. It's just. I don't know if I can do it again. I don't know if I can top my last book. What if I'm out of ideas? What if I'm not the person I used to be, and that's why I can't write anymore?" Sophie smiled softly and touched his arm. "Maybe you're not supposed to top your last book. Maybe it's about discovering who you are now. Writing isn't a competition with your past, it's a conversation with who you are in the moment. Ethan stared at her for a moment, surprised by how simple her words were, yet how profound. She was right. He had been measuring his success based on external expectations, on the book that had become a success because of his pain, and now, he was struggling because he was no longer that person. It wasn't about writing a book that would be bigger or better. It was about writing something that reflected who he was now, the person who had learned, healed, and grown. The next morning, instead of forcing himself to continue the story he had been struggling with, Ethan decided to take a different approach. He went for a walk by the beach with Max, letting his mind wander. He wasn't thinking about plot or characters. He was just living in the moment. As the sun dipped below the horizon, something inside him clicked. It wasn't about writing for fame or accolades. It was about writing for himself. He realized that he had spent too much of his life running away from his pain and trying to find an easy way out. But now, he understood that creativity, true creativity, comes from embracing life in its entirety. The light and the dark, the joys and the struggles. Ethan returned home that evening, feeling more at peace with his writing than he had in months. He sat down at his desk, his fingers hovering over the keyboard, and began typing, not with the expectation of perfection, but with the acceptance that this was his story to tell. Not anyone else's. His own. As the months passed, Ethan's writing began to flow more freely. He wasn't writing to escape, he was writing to understand. His new book, tentatively titled Between the Lines, began to take shape. It wasn't the same as The Broken Path. It wasn't filled with vengeance or anger, but rather, with a quiet resilience, the story of a person learning to love again, learning to trust again, and discovering that healing isn't linear. It was about finding strength not despite the brokenness, but through it. Sophie continued to be his sounding board, reading early drafts and offering feedback. Her presence in his life had become an anchor, a reminder that love, in its truest form, doesn't need to be perfect. It simply needs to be real. The duo's connection grew deeper with each passing day. They learned how to navigate the ebb and flow of life together, how to share in each other's joy and support each other through struggles. They didn't have all the answers, but they didn't need them. Together, they were enough. One afternoon, as Ethan sat on the porch of their cottage, looking out at the vast sea, Sophie came out and sat next to him, resting her head on his shoulder. They didn't speak for a while, simply taking in the peace that surrounded them. "I think we're exactly where we're supposed to be," Sophie said softly, her words a comfort to Ethan's soul. Ethan looked at her, his heart full, and nodded. "I think so too." And as the sun set behind the horizon, Ethan knew that this was just the beginning of the next chapter, one filled with endless possibilities, love, and the courage to continue writing his story, no matter where it led. As the months rolled by in Cedar Bay, Ethan found himself increasingly immersed in a life he had never thought possible. The days blended into one another with a calm, peaceful rhythm. He had become part of the community, attending small local events, chatting with neighbors, and even hosting occasional readings of his book at the local bookstore where Sophie worked. It was a new kind of life for him, one built on the foundation of understanding, healing, and taking each day as it came. Yet, despite the tranquility of his new existence, Ethan couldn't help but feel an itch beneath the surface. It wasn't dissatisfaction, but rather, a growing awareness that there was still so much more to explore, both in his writing and in his personal growth. He had spent years recovering from the devastation caused by his past, but now, he realized that the recovery was only part of the journey. The real challenge was moving forward with intention and purpose. Ethan had learned how to heal. But could he learn how to thrive? This question haunted him during his quiet walks along the shore with Max. It wasn't about escaping the past anymore, but about embracing the unknown future with the same bravery he had found in himself after his world had fallen apart. One evening, as he and Sophie sat on the porch, the topic of their futures came up naturally. "Do you ever wonder what it would be like to go beyond Cedar Bay? Sophie asked, looking out at the darkening sky. Ethan thought for a moment. The thought of leaving had crossed his mind, but the idea of stepping outside the safety and serenity of Cedar Bay was intimidating. Still, he knew deep down that if he was to fully embrace his future, he needed to let go of the comfort zone he had created. "I think about it sometimes," he admitted. "But Cedar Bay feels like home now. It's peaceful here." "I found so much peace here, Sophie." She nodded, a soft smile playing on her lips. "I know. But sometimes peace isn't enough, right? Sometimes, we need to push ourselves outside our comfort zones to really live." Her words struck a chord within Ethan. He had spent so much of his life running from discomfort that he had never allowed himself to truly grow outside the boundaries of his past. Sophie was right. Peace was important, but maybe it was time to find out what more life had to offer. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt the spark of excitement stir in his chest. What if there was more to this journey, more to writing, more to living? What if the next chapter wasn't about staying safe, but about embracing risk? With Sophie's encouragement, Ethan made a decision. He would take the leap and go beyond the quiet walls of Cedar Bay. It wasn't that he wanted to leave the life he had built, he still cherished every moment spent there, but he understood now that his growth wasn't defined by the boundaries of his physical surroundings. His growth lay in the willingness to embrace new experiences, to challenge himself, and to let the world shape him in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Ethan decided to travel. Not for a book tour or a promotional event, but for himself. He didn't have a set plan or destination in mind, he just wanted to immerse himself in new places, meet new people, and write from the heart. He wanted to find inspiration from the vast, uncharted territories that lay beyond his small, safe world. When he told Sophie, her face lit up with excitement, but there was a touch of sadness in her eyes. She had become such an important part of his life, and the thought of being apart for an indefinite period wasn't easy. But Sophie understood. She had spent years following her own path and knew the value of personal growth. She supported him, as she always had, with a love that was rooted in respect for the journey they each needed to take. "I'll be here when you come back," she said, squeezing his hand. "And when you go, don't forget that you're not alone. This is your journey, but I'm still a part of it." Her words were a balm to his soul. Ethan knew that whatever happened in the coming months, whatever the world threw his way, he wouldn't be facing it alone. Sophie was always with him, even from afar. The first destination on Ethan's list was New Orleans, a city known for its rich history, vibrant culture, and deep stories. He arrived with no expectations, simply allowing himself to wander through the streets, soaking in the sights, sounds, and energy that surrounded him. From the lively music of Bourbon Street to the quiet, shadowed corners of the French Quarter, New Orleans was a city of contrasts, much like his own journey. It wasn't long before Ethan found a small café tucked away in one of the quieter streets, where he sat with his notebook, observing the people around him. He listened to the conversations, the laughter, and the occasional sadness in their voices. Each story he heard felt like a thread in the intricate tapestry of life that he was now learning to appreciate in all its complexity. As the days turned into weeks, Ethan began to write. The words came to him freely now, not in the same rushed, desperate way they once had, but with a sense of ease. His experiences in New Orleans became the backdrop for his new story, a novel about rediscovering joy, finding beauty in unexpected places, and embracing the unknown without fear. It wasn't just the city that inspired him, it was the people he met along the way. A local jazz musician shared his story of struggle and perseverance, an elderly woman told him tales of love and loss, and a young artist spoke of finding hope in the face of failure. Each encounter was a reminder of how interconnected human lives were, and how every story, no matter how small, had its place in the grand narrative of the world. Ethan felt alive in ways he hadn't before. There was something magical about letting go of the need for control and simply living the story that was unfolding around him. It wasn't always easy, there were moments of doubt, of homesickness, and of loneliness, but he learned to embrace those moments as part of the experience. Just like the characters in his stories, he was learning to navigate the ups and downs of life with grace and resilience. As Ethan's journey continued, his book began to take shape. Between the lines had grown into something deeper than he had originally planned. It was no longer just a reflection of his past, it was a tribute to the people and places that had shaped him along the way. Each chapter felt like a step forward, a piece of the puzzle that was his life. One evening, as he sat in a quiet courtyard in a small town in Italy, he thought about his path, how it had twisted and turned, how it had broken and rebuilt him. He realized that this, all of this, was the essence of living. The road to self-discovery wasn't about finding a destination, it was about experiencing each moment, each encounter, and each challenge with an open heart. And as the sun set behind the rolling hills, casting a warm glow across the landscape, Ethan smiled. He had come full circle, from a man who sought revenge and closure to someone who had learned to live in the present, to write with authenticity, and to embrace the beauty of life in all its complexity. He was ready for whatever came next. Months passed, and Ethan's journey took him to several more places, France, Japan, and even the rugged beauty of Iceland. Everywhere he went, he gathered stories, small moments of humanity that now filled the pages of his new book. Through his travels, he discovered not only new cultures and landscapes but also deeper facets of himself. His writing had grown, too, expanding beyond his personal pain and into a universal exploration of the human experience. But as the months stretched on, Ethan began to feel a pull, a yearning to return to where it all began. Cedar Bay had always been his anchor, the place where he had started to heal, and as he sat in the cozy Parisian café one late afternoon, the realization dawned on him, it was time to go home. It wasn't that he didn't enjoy the adventures or the stories he was gathering along the way. It was simply that Cedar Bay had become the foundation upon which he had rebuilt his life, and in a way, he had reached a place in his heart where he no longer needed to run. The decision wasn't easy. Sophie, too, had been on her own journey during his travels. She had found her rhythm in Cedar Bay, and though she supported him fully, she had her own life now, one she had carefully cultivated with the bookstore and her own writing. Would they pick up where they left off? Would the distance that had grown between them during his travels be too much to bridge? Ethan didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing for certain, he needed to return. To bring closure to the chapter that had begun in Cedar Bay, to find out if there was something waiting for him there that he could no longer ignore. When Ethan arrived back in Cedar Bay, it felt different. The air was crisper, the sea seemed to call him in a way it hadn't before. He had spent months exploring the vast world, but in the end, his heart had led him back to the place where he had started to rebuild his life. He rented a small room in the same café where he and Sophie had shared countless conversations, looking out over the water as he once had. He began to write again, but this time with a deeper understanding of his place in the world. The themes in his book shifted. He had written about survival and healing, but now he wrote about reconciliation, about the beauty of starting over, of accepting that life, with all its imperfections, was worth living. Ethan still missed the adventure of his travels, but now, he realized that true adventure wasn't about the places you went, it was about the people you loved and the connections you made. His travels had taught him that peace, while often hard-won, wasn't about avoiding difficulty. It was about accepting that life would always be filled with both light and shadow. As the days passed, he reconnected with Sophie. They met at the bookstore where she had been working since his departure. She was different too, more grounded, more certain of her own place in the world. They shared their stories, the long gaps between their communication no longer feeling like barriers but rather as necessary pauses in the ebb and flow of their lives. "I think we've both learned a lot about ourselves," Sophie said as they sat in the bookstore, sipping coffee one quiet afternoon. "And I think that maybe, just maybe, we're both ready for something more, together." Ethan smiled. There was no rush this time, no sense of urgency. There was just a quiet understanding between them. Life had brought them back to one another, and now, it was about finding the next chapter, not as individuals, but but as partners, stronger, more whole. A year later, Ethan's new book was published, a beautifully woven narrative of his travels, but also of his inner journey toward acceptance. He called it The Road Home, a testament to the experiences that shaped him and the realization that home wasn't just a physical place. It was a state of mind, a place where he could finally be at peace with himself, his past, and his future. Sophie had her own success with her writing, and they began to collaborate on a few joint projects, books, readings, and community events that brought people together through storytelling. Together, they had built something real, something meaningful, a life not just for themselves, but for the people around them. They had taken all the lessons from their individual paths and merged them into something larger than they could have created on their own. And in the quiet of Cedar Bay, with Max at his feet, Ethan realized that this was enough. He didn't need to keep running to new places to feel alive. The life he had now was a result of all the roads he had traveled, and it was his own. Ethan sat on the porch of his small house overlooking the sea, his typewriter resting on the table in front of him. Sophie was inside, working on her next novel, and Max lay nearby, the three of them as content as could be. In the distance, the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the water. Ethan clicked open his notebook and began to write. This time, he wasn't writing for fame or success. He wasn't writing to prove anything to anyone. He was writing because it was who he was, a storyteller, someone who had learned the power of healing, the gift of second chances, and the importance of living life on his own terms. He wrote the first words of his new book, the words that felt just right, the words that spoke to the peace he had finally found. His journey had come full circle, but he knew the beauty of life was that the chapters were never truly over. There was always a next one. And so, Ethan continued to write, to live, and to love, knowing that the road ahead would be just as beautiful as the one that had brought him here. And so, Ethan's journey comes full circle, proof that no matter how far we wander, there's always a way back to ourselves. The road to healing, to growth, and to new beginnings isn't easy, but it's always worth it. What did you think of Ethan's story? Have you ever been at a crossroads in your life, where you had to choose between staying in your comfort zone and embracing the unknown? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences. Leave a comment below and let's start a conversation. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more journeys of resilience and transformation, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a chapter. Your support means everything and helps this community grow. Thanks for watching, and remember, life is always unfolding, one story at a time.